That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day became a story the whole community tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here we show that behind struggle and silence, there are still human hearts. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant rain, the kind that seeped into your bones long after the clouds had passed. It was early autumn in the small coastal town of Eldridge, where the river wound lazily through the outskirts, its waters dark and unforgiving under the grey sky. The temperature hovered just above freezing, a chill that made the world feel smaller, more isolated. Leaves rustled faintly in the breeze, their whispers the only sound breaking the silence along the overgrown path by the water's edge. No one was out there at that hour, not the joggers who stuck to the main roads, not the fishermen who waited for warmer light. Just the river, murmuring its secrets, and a girl who had learned to move like a shadow. Her name was Lena, though few knew it, and fewer cared to ask. At 17, she was a wisp of a figure, her frame swallowed by an oversized jacket scavenged from a church donation bin months ago. The fabric was threadbare at the elbows, stained with the grit of too many nights spent under bridges or in abandoned lots. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves over her shoulders, unbrushed and wild, framing eyes that held the weight of unspoken losses. Lena had run away 2 years prior, fleeing a home fractured by shouts and shattered glass, a mother's absence that left only echoes of neglect. She carried that guilt like a stone in her chest, the belief that she should have been stronger, should have held things together when everything fell apart. Now she survived on the fringes, invisible to the world that hurried past her on the streets. She picked up odd jobs when she could, washing dishes in the back of diners or sorting recyclables at dawn, always keeping her head down, her voice soft. Attention was a risk she couldn't afford. That morning, Lena had woken in her makeshift shelter, a cluster of cardboard and tarps hidden in a thicket near the riverbank. The ground was cold and unyielding beneath her thin sleeping bag, the kind of damp that made her joints ache. She rose slowly, her breath visible in the crisp air, rubbing her arms to chase away the shiver. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, a familiar companion, but she pushed it aside. There was a routine to her days: scavenge for food from the bakery's back alley, avoid the stares of passers-by, and wander the quieter paths where judgment couldn't reach her. The river had become her reluctant confidant, its steady flow a mirror to the chaos she kept buried. She walked its banks often, not for peace, but for the illusion of solitude. As she trudged along the muddy trail, her boots, ill-fitting and worn, squelched softly in the earth. The water lapped gently at the shore, but there was an undercurrent to it, a deceptive pull that locals warned about in hushed tones. Signs posted along the path, faded and splintered, cautioned against swimming. Strong currents, no lifeguard on duty. Lena paid them little mind. She wasn't one for risks, not anymore. Her steps were measured, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the town lights flickered faintly in the distance. The world felt vast and indifferent, the kind of morning where hope seemed as elusive as warmth. Then a sound pierced the quiet, a sharp, panicked cry, followed by a splash that echoed like a warning. Lena froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. She turned toward the river, her pulse quickening as fragments of memory surfaced unbidden. The last time she'd heard a scream like that, back in the old apartment, when her father's anger had spilled over and she'd hidden in the closet, too small to intervene. She shook it off, telling herself to keep moving. It wasn't her business. People like her didn't get involved. They survived by staying unseen. But the cry came again, higher this time, laced with terror, a child's voice. Peering through the reeds, Lena spotted him, a boy no older than 8, his small body thrashing in the shallow but treacherous waters. He must have been playing too close to the edge, perhaps chasing a stray ball or a fleeting adventure, unaware of the current's grip. His jacket, bright red against the murky brown, bobbed as he struggled, his arms flailing wildly. Bubbles broke the surface where his mouth had gone under, and for a moment the world narrowed to that single desperate fight. No one else was near, the path was empty, the town still asleep. The boy's face twisted in fear, his eyes wide and pleading toward the empty shore. Lena's breath caught, her hands trembling at her sides. She could walk away. She should. The guilt from her past whispered that she wasn't equipped for this, that heroes didn't come from the shadows. But something deeper stirred, a moral core she couldn't silence, the part of her that had always ached to protect what was fragile, even when she couldn't protect herself. The river's chill seemed to seep into her veins, but she felt the heat of adrenaline rising, her heartbeat a drum in her ears. Without another thought, she dropped her small bag and bolted toward the water, the cold mud sucking at her boots. The boy was slipping farther out now, the current dragging him toward the deeper channel. Lena kicked off her shoes, the icy ground biting into her bare feet, and waded in. The water hit her like a shock, numbing her legs instantly, but she pressed forward, her arms slicing through the surface. "Hold on!" she called, her voice raw and unsteady, carrying over the rush of the river. The boy turned toward her, his small hand reaching out, fingers splayed in desperation. She swam harder, ignoring the burn in her lungs, the weight of her soaked clothes pulling her down. Memories flashed, her own childhood fears, the times she'd felt that same drowning helplessness, and they fueled her, turning fear into resolve. As she reached him, her fingers grazed his jacket. She grabbed hold, pulling him close, his body light but slippery against hers. "I've got you," she whispered, more to herself than to him, as she began the fight back to shore. The current resisted, tugging like invisible hands, but Lena held firm, her muscles straining, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The boy's sobs mixed with the water's roar, a sound that twisted something deep inside her. Inch by inch they moved, the shore a distant promise through the spray. By the time they collapsed onto the muddy bank, both were shivering uncontrollably, the boy's face pale and streaked with tears. He clung to her, burying his head in her shoulder, while Lena wrapped her arms around him, her own body racked with exhaustion. The cold seeped deeper now, but relief washed over her like a quiet tide. She didn't know who he was, or that his mother was a nurse at the local hospital racing to work that very morning. All she knew was that she'd acted against every instinct to hide. And in that moment, as the first rays of sun broke through the clouds, warming their drenched forms, Lena felt a flicker of something she hadn't known in years: purpose. The boy's small chest heaved with ragged breaths as he huddled against Lena on the riverbank, his wet jacket clinging like a second skin. The mud beneath them was cold and slick, a gritty paste that smeared their legs and hands, while the river's murmur faded into a distant hum, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Lena's own body trembled from the chill, her teeth chattering softly, but she held him tighter, one hand stroking his damp hair in awkward reassurance. His name, she learned in whispers between sobs, was Tommy. He was 8, out exploring before school, chasing a frog too close to the water's edge. His mother worked at the hospital, he said, her voice a lifeline in his fear, Nurse Elena Ramirez, the one who fixed everything with steady hands and quiet words. Lena nodded, murmuring comfort she barely believed in herself, her mind racing with the aftermath. She should leave now, slip away before questions came, before eyes turned on her like spotlights. But Tommy's grip was fierce, his face buried in her shoulder, and the warmth of his small form against her soaked clothes anchored her in place. The sun climbed higher, casting a pale light that did little to chase the autumn chill, and in the distance the faint wail of a siren stirred. Perhaps a neighbor had heard the cries, or seen the struggle from a window. Lena's heart quickened. Exposure was a threat she knew too well. She helped Tommy to his feet. his legs wobbly like a fawn's, and together they trudged up the path toward the road, leaving footprints that the rising tide would soon erase. By the time they reached the edge of town, the streets were stirring to life. Trucks rumbled past, their exhaust mixing with the salty tang of the sea air, and shop owners flipped signs to open, their faces etched with the routine weariness of another day. Tommy pointed to a modest house on a side street, its paint peeling like old skin, and Lena walked him to the door, her bare feet numb against the cracked sidewalk. The door flew open before they could knock, and there stood Elena Ramirez, mid-30s, her nurse's scrubs slightly rumpled from a hurried morning, her dark eyes wide with a mother's terror. She scooped Tommy into her arms, tears streaming down her face as she checked him over, her hands professional yet frantic, palpating his limbs, listening to his breaths with an ear pressed to his chest. "You saved him," Elena said, her voice breaking as she looked at Lena, really seeing her for the first time. The tangled hair, the oversized jacket dripping river water onto the stoop, the exhaustion carved into her young features. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a raw gratitude that made Lena's throat tighten. Elena insisted she come inside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, the fabric soft and smelling faintly of laundry soap, a luxury Lena hadn't felt in months. Over a cup of hot tea that burned her chilled fingers, Lena spoke little, her words halting as she recounted the morning's blur. Eleanor listened, nodding, her own story spilling out in fragments, long shifts in the ER, the endless cycle of emergencies that left little time for Tommy, the guilt of a single mother stretched thin. The hospital, Elena explained, was the heart of Eldridge, a squat brick building on the hill, its windows glowing like beacons against the night sky. It was a place of quiet miracles and unspoken burdens, where the staff moved through fluorescent-lit halls with the precision of soldiers in a war no one else saw. Nurses like her, doctors with steady hands scarred by invisible wounds, head nurses who commanded with a glance. They were the unseen guardians, their compassion forged in the fire of loss. But to the outside world, they were just that, unseen, or worse, judged. "People think we're cold," Eleanor said softly, stirring her tea, the steam rising like a veil between them. "Machines in white coats too busy for heart. They don't see the nights we hold hands through the dark, or the way we carry our failures home." Lena sipped her tea, the warmth spreading through her like a hesitant thaw, and felt a kinship stir. She knew misunderstanding. It was the shadow that followed her on every street, in every averted gaze. The town whispered about the river girl, the runaway who begged for scraps. Assuming her silence meant defiance, her solitude meant danger. No one saw the girl who bandaged her own cuts in the dark, who dreamed of a world where vulnerability wasn't a crime. Elena's words painted a similar portrait of the hospital staff, heroes painted as bureaucrats, their exhaustion mistaken for indifference. The ER was a battlefield of beeps and whispers, where the antiseptic smell clung to skin, like regret, and the soft hum of machines underscored the fragility of life. Night shifts blurred into days, fatigue etching lines around eyes that had witnessed too much. Car wrecks at dawn, fevers that raged unchecked, families shattered in sterile rooms. As Tommy dozed on the couch, his small snores a rhythmic comfort, Eleanor reached for her phone. "I have to call in," she said, her voice steadying with resolve. "They need to know I'm late, but more than that. They need to know about you." Lena tensed, her instinct to flee rising like bile, but Elena's hand on her arm was gentle, insistent. The call connected, and Elena's words flowed, calm at first, then laced with emotion as she described the rescue. The girl who had braved the current without hesitation. On the other end, voices murmured, questions layered with concern, and Lena caught fragments. Dr. Harlan, the head of ER, his tone gruff but kind. Nurse Patel, Elena's closest ally, her voice sharp with protectiveness. The conversation stretched, Elena pacing the small living room, the floorboards creaking under her steps. She spoke of the hospital's hidden heart, how the staff had their own scars, doctors who'd lost patients to the river's pull before, nurses who'd buried their grief under layers of protocol. The outside world saw bureaucracy in their charts and forms, judgment in their hurried consultations, but inside those walls, humanity bloomed in quiet acts. A shared coffee at 3 a.m., a hand squeezed during a code. "We're family," Elena said into the phone, her eyes meeting Lena's, "and family doesn't forget." When she hung up, the air felt charged, the room warmer despite the draft from the window. Elena smiled faintly, the first real one of the morning. "They're waiting for us. Come with me. You deserve to be seen." Lena hesitated, her fingers twisting the blanket's edge. The old guilt whispering that she didn't belong in such places, clean, ordered, full of purpose. But Tommy stirred, reaching for her hand, and something in his trusting gaze echoed her own buried longing. The walk to the hospital was short, the hill steep under the strengthening sun, but each step carried Lena closer to a reckoning she hadn't sought. The building loomed ahead, its entrance a glass moor under the overcast sky, and as they approached, Lena felt the first stirrings of unease. Not fear exactly, but the weight of eyes that might finally see beyond the shadows. Inside, the lobby enveloped them in a hush, broken only by the distant chime of elevators and the murmur of voices behind closed doors. The air was cool and sterile, carrying that unmistakable tang of disinfectant that promised healing but hinted at hidden pains. Elena led the way, her stride purposeful, Tommy skipping between them, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. Staff glanced up from their stations, receptionists with knowing nods, orderlies pausing mid-stride, and Lena kept her head down, her damp clothes drawing subtle stares. But there was no disdain, only a quiet curiosity that built like a gathering storm. They reached the ER wing, where the lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on linoleum floors worn smooth by countless footsteps. The beeps of monitors filtered through half-open doors, a symphony of fragile lives, and the faint scent of coffee mingled with the clinical edge. "Doctor." Harlan waited at the nurse's station, a tall man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. He extended a hand to Lena, his grip firm yet warm, the lines on his palm speaking of hands that had mended and mourned. "What you did out there," he said, his voice low and measured. "That's the kind of courage we fight for every day." Around them, the ward stirred. Nurses emerged from rooms, their scrubs whispering as they moved, doctors setting aside clipboards with deliberate care. Head nurse Patel approached, her presence commanding yet soft, a woman whose fatigue was etched in the subtle hunch of her shoulders, but whose eyes burned with unyielding compassion. They formed a loose circle, not overwhelming but enveloping, their faces a mosaic of gratitude and something deeper, recognition. Lena stood at the center, her heart pounding against her ribs, the chill of the river replaced by the warmth of this unexpected embrace. For the first time, the judgment of the world outside felt distant, replaced by a silence that spoke of understanding. The circle of staff in the ER widened slowly, like ripples in a still pond. As more figures emerged from the corridors, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their pale glow reflecting off white walls that seemed to close in with quiet intensity. The air was thick with the sharp bite of antiseptic, undercut by the faint, comforting aroma of fresh coffee from a pot brewing in the break room nearby. Lena stood there, her bare feet shifting uncomfortably on the cool linoleum, the blanket from Elena's home still draped over her shoulders like a makeshift shield. Tommy clung to his mother's leg, his small fingers twisting the hem of her scrubs, while Elena's hand rested lightly on Lena's back, a touch that anchored her against the rising tide of attention. Dr. Harlan cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hush with the steady cadence of someone accustomed to commanding chaos. "We've all heard the story from Elena," he began, his eyes locking onto Lena's with a gentleness that belied his authoritative frame. A girl alone by the river, hearing a cry, and without a second thought, diving into waters that have taken more than we care to count. That's not just bravery. That's the core of what we do here every shift. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, nurses nodding, a young resident adjusting his stethoscope with trembling hands, the head nurse's lips pressing into a thin line of restrained emotion. They were a tapestry of exhaustion and resolve, some with coffee stains on their sleeves, others with the faint shadows of night shifts etched under their eyes, all bound by the invisible threads of shared burdens. Lena felt the weight of their gazes, not as judgment, but as a mirror reflecting her own hidden fractures. She wanted to shrink back, to murmur excuses and slip into the shadows where she belonged. But the warmth in the room, the subtle press of bodies forming a protective ring, held her in place, her heart beat a erratic rhythm against her ribs, echoing the distant beeps of monitors from adjacent rooms, each pulse a reminder of the fragility she'd just pulled from the river's grasp. Guilt flickered at the edges of her mind. Who was she to stand here, accepted so readily, when her own life was a patchwork of evasion and survival? Yet, as Elena squeezed her shoulder, a quiet resolve stirred. The same moral spark that had driven her into the current now urging her to stay. The group shifted, making space as head nurse Patel stepped forward. She was a woman in her late 40s, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun that did little to soften the lines of fatigue on her face, but her voice carried the warmth of embers banked against the cold. "The rivers claim too many in this town," she said, her words measured, each one landing like a stone in still water. Kids wandering too far, adults underestimating the pull. We've patched up the survivors, held the hands of families who weren't so lucky. But you turned the tide today. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, softened as they met Lena's, and in that moment, Lena saw the unspoken toll, the nights when protocols couldn't save everyone, when compassion warred with the necessity of detachment. A young nurse, barely out of training, piped up from the edge of the circle, her voice quivering with the raw edge of empathy. "I lost a brother to those waters years ago. He was Tommy's age, thought he could swim against anything. We were all at the hospital that night, waiting, hoping." She trailed off, her hand rising to her throat, fingers brushing the embroidered pin on her collar, a small caduceus symbol that caught the light. The room fell into a heavier silence, broken only by the soft creak of a gurney wheel in the hallway beyond. Lena's breath hitched. The story echoed her own losses, the family she'd fled not from danger, but from the slow drowning of neglect. She hadn't saved her world back then, too small and scared to act, but today, in this sterile sanctuary, she'd reclaimed a piece of that power. "Doctor." Harlan nodded, his hand resting on a nearby chart station, the paper rustling faintly under his palm. "This place, it's misunderstood out there. Folks see us rushing through halls, barking orders, and they think we're heartless. But every code we run, every hand we steady, it's because we've all got our ghosts. Elena's boy, Tommy, he's one of ours now in a way. And you, Lena, you've reminded us why we keep going." He gestured to the staff, who began to close the circle tighter, their presence a quiet wall against the world's indifference. A doctor in the back, his scrubs bearing the faint scent of latex and urgency, added softly, "We carry the weight so others don't have to. Today you shared it." The emotional undercurrent swelled, micro-reactions playing across faces, a nurse's eyes glistening under the harsh lights, a resident's jaw tightening with suppressed tears, Elena's breath catching as she watched her son smile up at Lena. The protagonist's past wounds throbbed in sympathy, the guilt of abandonment, the trauma of invisibility, triggered by this outpouring. She wasn't just a runaway here, she was seen. Her quiet heroism laid bare, but beneath the gratitude, tension simmered. Whispers of concern filtered through. The river's dangers weren't over. Currents like that drew undertows, and word of the rescue might bring questions from authorities. Social services sniffing around a girl with no fixed address. Lena's hands trembled slightly under the blanket, her mind racing with the fear of exposure. The fragile belonging threatening to shatter. As the group began to disperse slightly, preparing for the influx of the morning shift, Elena pulled Lena aside into a quieter alcove, the walls lined with supply carts that rattled softly with each passing step. "They're not just honoring you," she whispered, her voice laced with a deeper urgency. "Tommy. He reminds them of their own. My husband was a paramedic, lost to a call gone wrong years ago. We all carry that echo." The revelation hung in the air, heavy as the humid chill seeping from the air vents, redefining the morning's chaos into something profoundly personal. Lena's throat tightened, compassion blooming amid her toughness, the hospital's misunderstood family enveloping her like a lifeline. The staff reconvened in the central hallway, their numbers swelling as word spread. Doctors pausing mid-rounds, nurses from other wards drifting in, even the custodial staff lingering at the edges. They formed a corridor of quiet solidarity, hands clasped or resting on shoulders, the soft beeping of the ER fading into a reverent hush. Lena stood at the heart, her pulse syncing with the rhythm of the place, the first threads of redemption weaving through her isolation. But as the honor unfolded, a shadow of rising peril loomed, the outside world knocking, ready to reclaim its judgments. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The hallway stretched like a vein through the hospital's core, its walls a stark white that amplified every whisper and footfall under the relentless buzz of fluorescent bulbs. The air grew thicker, laced with the metallic tang of medical carts wheeling past and the underlying pulse of urgency that never fully slept in the ER. Lena felt it closing in, the corridor of staff now a living barrier. Nurses with stethoscopes dangling like pendants, doctors whose pages vibrated softly against their hips. All eyes turned toward her with a mix of reverence and quiet resolve. Their faces, illuminated in the cold light, revealed the subtle fractures of their world, a doctor's furrowed brow etched by decisions that lingered like ghosts. A nurse's fingers twitching at her side, as if still reaching for a pulse that had faded too soon. Tommy squeezed Lena's hand, his small palm warm and sticky against her chilled skin, while Eleanor stood beside her, a pillar of steady breath amid the gathering storm. Dr. Harlan raised his voice slightly, addressing the assembly with the measured tone of a man who had steadied countless crises. Lena's act this morning wasn't just a rescue, it was a reminder that compassion doesn't wait for permission. In a place like this, where we face the river's toll every season, drownings, near misses, the families we can't always save, we see our own reflections in stories like hers. Nods rippled through the group, a low hum of agreement rising like steam from the nearby coffee station. But beneath the honor, tension coiled, invisible yet palpable, as if the building itself sensed the fragility of the moment. Lena's chest tightened, her heartbeat echoing the erratic beeps from an adjacent room, each thump a reminder of the shadows chasing her. She had fled her past to avoid this, entanglements, questions, the risk of being dragged back into a system that labeled her broken before it tried to mend her. The first crack appeared subtly, a door swinging open at the far end of the hall with a hydraulic hiss. A security guard entered, his uniform crisp and authoritative, radio crackling with static that cut through the hush like a scalpel. Behind him trailed a woman in a plain coat, her badge glinting under the lights. Social services, Lena recognized the type from fragmented memories of courtrooms and foster homes that had chewed her up and spat her out. The guards' boots thudded against the linoleum, each step amplifying the chill that seeped from the air vents, carrying the faint, acrid scent of overworked HVAC systems. Whispers stirred among the staff. How did they hear so fast? The river patrol must have radioed it in. Lena's breath shallowed, adrenaline flooding her veins like ice water, her free hand clenching the edge of the blanket until her knuckles whitened. She wanted to bolt, to dissolve into the service corridors she knew existed behind the facade, but Tommy's grip held her, his innocent trust a chain she couldn't break. Elena stepped forward, her posture shifting from grateful mother to protective colleague, her scrubs rustling softly as she intercepted the newcomers. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice even but edged with steel, the kind honed from years of advocating for patients who couldn't speak for themselves. The social worker, Ms. Hargrove, introduced herself with a clipboard clutched like a shield, her eyes scanning the group before settling on Lena. "We received a report from the sheriff's office about an incident at the river. A minor involved, a child in distress, and an unidentified teenager who intervened. Protocol requires we assess the situation, especially since the rescuer appears, unaccompanied." Her tone was neutral, clinical, but it landed like judgment, the words slicing through the air and exposing Lena's vulnerability. The staff bristled subtly, a nurse's jaw tightening, Dr. Harlan's hand pausing mid-gesture, his fingers curling as if to grasp an IV line slipping away. Lena's mind raced, fragments of her past surging unbidden. The night she packed a bag and slipped out the window, the echo of her father's slurred accusations, the guilt that she had abandoned her younger sibling to the same fractured home. She had run to escape that cycle, to avoid becoming another file in a drawer. But now it loomed here, in this sanctuary of white coats and beeping machines. Fear clawed at her throat, her pulse thundering in her ears, drowning out the soft murmurs of support from the encircling staff. "She's with us," Head Nurse Patel interjected, her voice a low rumble that commanded attention, stepping into the fray with the authority of someone who had faced down worse than bureaucrats. "Lena saved Eleanor's son. Whatever your protocols, this isn't the time for interrogations." But Ms. Hargrove persisted, her pen tapping rhythmically against her clipboard, the sound a metronome of escalating pressure. "I'm afraid it is. The girl needs to be identified. Runaway status, potential endangerment. We can't ignore that." The confrontation built like a fever, the hallway's temperature rising despite the clinical chill, sweat beading at Lena's temples as she fought the urge to retreat. Adrenaline sharpened her senses, the faint tremor in Elena's exhale, the way Tommy's eyes widened in confusion. The collective inhale of the staff as they formed a tighter phalanx, their bodies a human shield against the intrusion. Dr. Harlan moved beside Patel, his presence adding weight, his voice dropping to a grave timbre. "This hospital stands by its own. Lena's actions saved a life, one of ours. If you want to question her, you'll do it with counsel, not in the middle of our ward." The social worker hesitated, her gaze flickering over the unified front. Dozens of faces, from weary residents to seasoned surgeons, their exhaustion transformed into fierce determination. No one budged, the corridor now a fortress of quiet defiance, the antiseptic air heavy with the unspoken vow to protect their newfound kin. Lena's determination flickered amid the guilt, her moral core refusing to let this moment shatter. She straightened slightly, meeting Ms. Hargrove's eyes for the first time, her voice emerging hoarse but steady. I couldn't let him drown, that's all." The words hung, simple yet profound, triggering micro-reactions around her. A nurse's hand reaching out to steady her elbow, Eleanor's nod of solidarity, the subtle shift in the social worker's stance as doubt crept in. But the tension crested, the guard's radio sputtering with an incoming call from dispatch, pulling Hargrove's attention momentarily. In that breath, the staff pressed closer, their whispers a barrier of compassion. "Stay with us. You're not alone." Lena's hands trembled, the blanket slipping slightly, but she held her ground. The river's chill replaced by the heat of this battle, not of water, but of wills. The outside world's grasp tightened, threatening to yank her back into isolation. Yet here, in the heart of the ER, her quiet heroism fueled a resistance that promised to redefine her solitude. As the exchange dragged, voices overlapping in a symphony of defense and protocol, a deeper undercurrent stirred. The fear that this honor could unravel into loss, forcing Lena to confront the very wounds that had driven her to the fringes. The hallway's lights flickered once, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters, underscoring the moral danger unfolding. Determination burned in her chest, mingling with the adrenaline's rush. As the staff's unity began to tip the scales, their humanity a bulwark against the encroaching storm. The standoff in the hallway stretched taut, the air humming with the low vibration of tension that seemed to seep from the very walls of the ER. Fluorescent lights cast a merciless glare on the assembled staff, highlighting the subtle tremors in hands that had steadied countless shaking limbs. Nurses with fingers curled loosely at their sides, doctors whose shoulders bore the invisible weight of decisions made in the dead of night. Lena's pulse thrummed in her temples, a relentless drumbeat syncing with the distant wail of an ambulance siren piercing the morning haze outside. The social worker, Miss Hargrove, stood her ground, her clipboard a barrier of bureaucracy, but cracks formed in her resolve as the corridor filled with more figures. Orderlies pausing their rounds, a radiologist emerging from the imaging suite, her lab coat fluttering like a flag of allegiance. The scent of fresh linens from a passing cart mingled with the sharper edge of stress sweat, creating a heady mix that clung to the back of Lena's throat. Elena positioned herself squarely between Lena and the intruders, her breath steady but shallow. The rise and fall of her chest a quiet anchor in the escalating storm. "This isn't about protocol," she said, her voice threading through the murmurs like a suture closing a wound. "It's about a boy who almost didn't make it home." Lena risked everything. No questions, no hesitation. "If your office wants records, fine, but not like this, not here." Ms. Hargrove's eyes narrowed, her pen hovering over the page, but the guard at her side shifted uncomfortably, his radio emitting a burst of static that echoed like a warning shot. The staff's unity was palpable, a slow-building wall of compassion that pressed forward inch by inch, their footfalls on the linoleum a soft chorus of solidarity. Lena felt it enveloping her, warm against the chill of exposure, yet her guilt gnawed deeper, the familiar ache of being the outsider, the one who disrupted rather than healed. Dr. Harlan stepped closer, his presence commanding without aggression, the faint scent of his aftershave cutting through the clinical air. "We've all been where she is," he said, his gaze sweeping the group before settling on Hargrove. "Overlooked, judged before the facts. This hospital isn't just a building, it's a refuge for the broken pieces of this town." His words hung, heavy with unspoken history, and in that pause, the first fracture in the confrontation widened. Head nurse Patel moved to Lena's side, her hand brushing the girl's arm in a gesture so light it barely registered, yet it carried the weight of shared burdens. "Let me tell you about the river," Patel murmured, her voice low enough for only the inner circle to hear, though the hallway's hush amplified it like a confession in a confessional. 2 years ago we lost a girl, 16, runaway like you, Lena. She washed up after a storm, body cold as the stones she clung to. Her name was Mia. Foster kid, no one claimed her. We fought for hours in this very ER, but the water had taken too much. Lena's breath caught the name, Mia, striking like a current pulling her under. She saw it in Patel's eyes, the micro flicker of pain, pupils dilating slightly, a subtle swallow against the lump in her throat. The nurse continued, her words measured, each one laced with the raw edge of memory. Mia reminded us of our own daughters, sisters, the vulnerabilities we patch up but can't always save. She had that same fire in her, quiet but unyielding, the kind that dives into danger without a life vest. When Elena called about Tommy this morning, it hit us all over again, that cry from the river. It echoed Mia's last moments. We searched for days back then, combed the banks, held vigils in these halls, but no one heard her in time. The revelation rippled outward, faces in the corridor softening with recognition, a young resident's hand rising to cover her mouth, stifling a sharp inhale. An orderly's shoulders slumping as old grief resurfaced. Tommy, sensing the shift, pressed closer to Lena, his small frame a living symbol of what might have been lost again, his rescue a bridge across the chasm of their collective loss. Elena's hand tightened on Lena's shoulder, her touch trembling now, the professional facade cracking to reveal the woman beneath. "Tommy, he's all I have left of my husband," she whispered, her voice fracturing like thin ice underfoot. "Carlos was an ER tech here, pulled from a wreck on the interstate 3 years back. The river took Mia, the road took him, but this place, this family, held me through it. When you pulled Tommy from that water, Lena, it wasn't just him you saved. You pulled us all back from the edge." The words redefined the morning's chaos, transforming Lena's solitary act into a thread weaving through their scars. She saw it in their eyes, the way Dr. Harlan's jaw clenched, his fingers flexing as if still compressing a chest in futile rhythm. The way a cluster of nurses exchanged glances heavy with the ghosts of patients who'd slipped away on rainy nights like this one. Lena's own trauma mirrored theirs. The siblings she'd left behind in that crumbling home, the guilt of fleeing without looking back, the drowning sensation of isolation that the river had nearly claimed for her too. Here, in this fluorescent-lit vigil, she wasn't the villain of her story. She was the echo of their lost ones, a redemption they hadn't known they craved. The social worker faltered, her clipboard lowering slightly as the emotional truth permeated the air, thick as the humid draft from the vents. I didn't realize," Hargrove said, her voice softening, the clinical edge dulled by the humanity unfolding before her. But the tension didn't dissolve. It evolved, the staff's protective circle tightening further, their breaths sinking in a collective resolve. Whispers spread, stories of other near misses, the ER's hidden rituals of mourning, coffee cups left untouched on nightstands, a shared silence after codes that ended in defeat. Lena's hands steadied, the adrenaline ebbing into a profound ache, her moral wound laid bare and for the first time shared. The revelation hung like a veil lifted, exposing the hospital's heart, not cold machines, but a community forged in loss, where compassion bloomed from the soil of sorrow. Tommy's face tilted up to hers, his eyes wide with unspoken thanks, and in that gaze, Lena glimpsed her own reflection. Not broken, but resilient, a quiet hero amid the beeps and whispers. As Hargrove conferred quietly with the guard, the corridor pulsed with renewed purpose. The staff's micro-reactions, a tapestry of healing, nods of affirmation, hands clasping in solidarity, the faint rustle of scrubs as they prepared to stand firm. Lena felt the shift deep in her chest, the guilt loosening its grip, replaced by a tentative belonging. The river's shadow loomed outside, but here in this bastion of white walls and steady hearts, the deeper truth redefined everything. She had saved more than a boy. She had resurrected pieces of their souls, binding her invisibility to their unbreakable light. The confrontation simmered, not resolved, but transformed, the moral danger yielding to the slow burn of redemption's promise. The corridor's tension ebbed like a receding tide, the fluorescent lights steadying their hum as Miss Hargrove's shoulders finally slumped, her clipboard folding shut with a soft click that echoed through the hush. The air, still heavy with the mingled scents of antiseptic and resolve, seemed to lighten, the distant beeps of monitors resuming their rhythmic vigil as if the ER itself exhaled in relief. Lena stood frozen amid the circle of staff, her bare feet rooted to the cool linoleum, the blanket's wool scratching faintly against her skin. Tommy's hand remained clasped in hers, his small breaths quick and trusting, while Eleanor's presence at her side radiated a quiet ferocity, her fingers lingering on Lena's arm like an unspoken vow. The social worker's eyes darted from face to face, the unyielding gazes of doctors and nurses, their postures a seamless wall of compassion, and she nodded once curtly. "We'll follow up through proper channels," Hargrove murmured, her voice stripped of its earlier edge, the guard trailing her as they retreated toward the lobby, the hydraulic door sighing shut behind them. In the aftermath, the hallway transformed, the staff's circle contracting into an embrace of sorts, bodies shifting closer with the subtle rustle of scrubs and the faint creak of shoes on tile. Dr. Harlan placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, his touch warm and deliberate, the calluses from years of precise incisions brushing her like a benediction. "You don't face this alone anymore," he said, his words low and threaded with the gravel of exhaustion, eyes crinkling at the corners in a rare softening. Head nurse Patel nodded, her bun loosening slightly as she reached into her pocket, withdrawing a small embroidered pin, a silver caduceus intertwined with the hospital's crest, its edges worn from countless shifts. "This isn't just a symbol," she explained, her voice a gentle rumble, pinning it carefully to the lapel of Lena's damp jacket. The metal was cool against the fabric, a weight that grounded her, marking her as one of them, not a visitor but kin, protected by the unspoken code of those who mended in the shadows. Murmurs swelled around her, soft and enveloping, as nurses pressed forward with offers that wove a safety net from their weary hands. "Stay in the staff quarters tonight," one suggested, her voice laced with the faint tremor of empathy, eyes glistening under the lights. "We've got a spare bunk, clean sheets, no questions." A young resident, his stethoscope swaying like a pendulum, added, "I'll pull strings for a checkup, make sure that river didn't leave any marks." Elena knelt to Tommy's level, whispering assurances before rising to meet Lena's gaze, her own eyes rimmed with the quiet tears of a mother reborn. "Your family now," she said simply, the words carrying the depth of her losses, the husband gone, the river's ghosts, and in them Lena heard the echo of her own redemption, the moral wound of abandonment cauterized by this unexpected belonging. The pin gleamed faintly, a beacon against the clinical pallor, symbolizing not just acceptance but a shield, protection from the world's judgments, a place to heal her fractures amid those who understood silence's weight. The group lingered, the corridor a sanctuary of shared breaths and subtle gestures. A hand squeezed in passing, a nod that spoke volumes, before the demands of the shift pulled them away, one by one, into the labyrinth of rooms and crises. Lena followed Elena to a quiet lounge off the main hall, the door clicking shut behind them with a finality that sealed the morning's chaos. The space was modest, walls lined with lockers dented from years of use. The air warmer here, scented with the faint vanilla of a forgotten candle. Tommy curled on a worn couch, his eyelids drooping as exhaustion claimed him, while Lena sank into a chair, the pin's coolness a constant against her chest. Elena poured water from a pitcher, the liquid glugging softly into a paper cup, and sat across from her, the table between them scarred by countless coffee rings. "We'll handle the rest," Elena continued, her voice steady now, laced with the compassion that hid behind her professional toughness. "Social services, paperwork. I've got colleagues who know the ropes. No one's taking you back to that life." Lena's throat tightened, the guilt that had shadowed her for 2 years surfacing in a rush. The sibling left behind, the home's suffocating grip, the belief that her goodness was a fragile illusion. But here, in the soft glow of the lounge's lamp, it dissolved, replaced by a tentative peace. The hospital's heart, so often misjudged as mechanical, revealed its quiet heroism, the way staff like Eleanor carried patients' pains home only to rise again at dawn. Lena traced the pin's edges with a fingertip, the metal warming under her touch, and felt the first stirrings of community, a redemption woven from threads of loss and light. As the day waned, the sun dipping low to paint the windows in amber hues, Lena stepped out into the cooling air, the pin hidden but ever present. The river, visible from the hill, flowed onward, its surface deceptively calm, a reminder of dangers braved and bonds forged. She walked the paths she'd once haunted alone, but now with purpose. The town's indifferent bustle softened by the knowledge of allies in white coats. No longer a shadow, she carried their protection like an invisible cloak, her moral core affirmed in the silence of belonging. In the quiet aftermath, Eldridge's streets whispered of change, the river's murmur a somber lullaby to the overlooked. Lena's story, born from a cry in the cold, unfolded into a tapestry of human hearts, traumatized, yet resilient, judged, yet compassionate. It spoke of quiet acts that ripple through misunderstanding, of communities hidden in plain sight, offering redemption to those who dared to reach. The pin, small and steadfast, became her talisman, a bridge from isolation to quiet heroism, proving that even in the frayed edges of life, humanity endures. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of teen saved a nurse's son from drowning. Every doctor in the ER gathered to honor her. See you in the next one. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Lena reach more people who still believe in humanity.